Did you know that Scream was actually inspired by a real-life murder spree? So Scream is regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever made. It was written by Kevin Williamson and directed by Wes Craven, and Scream kind of single-handedly reinvented the once-dead slasher genre for a new generation. While most might hold the 1996 film in high regard as an all-time great, it's not usually seen as one of the scariest horror films ever made. Ghostface is indeed frightening, but the tone isn't as dark as a lot of other horror films out there. Scream actually aims to be fun. You get anxious, you jump, but then you laugh. But there's kind of no fun to be found in its backstory though, as Williamson was inspired to pen one of his most famous creations after watching a show about one of America's most heinous serial killers.
It stands as one of 1990's most shocking stories.
18-year-old Sonia Larson was found murdered.
17-year-old Christina Powell.
18-year-old Krista Hoyt.
Early this morning.
3 young women, all students, have been found.
There was mutilation.
Manny Taboto, Tracy Paulus,
brutally murdered at their apartment.
And I say, hello, Satan.
This was the ultimate nightmare for parents who are sending their kids off to college. In a space of 3 days, one after another, students in apartments being killed, totally vulnerable.
Now that the death toll has reached 5, students are talking of returning home.
I'm terrified. I couldn't sleep last night. It's really scary.
What's the worst that could happen? Well, this was the worst that could happen.
Me and the devil.
They have a serial killer.
Serial killer is on the loose.
Now, he may not be as notorious as Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, or Ted Bundy, but Daniel Rowling, known as the Gainesville Ripper, was just as disturbed. In August of 1990, he went on a 4-day murder spree that would lead to the death of 5 Florida college students. And 4 years later, an aspiring screenwriter was watching a show on ABC called Turning Point. And this was actually about the Gainesville Ripper's crime, which actually shook Williamson so much it inspired him to write a screenplay that would later become Scream. Though the Gainesville Ripper wasn't a teenager, nor did he prank call his victims or wear a mask, he planted the seeds of fear in Williamson's mind, creating a feeling inside of him that he wanted to recreate on the page. So Daniel Rowling's rampage started on Friday, August 24th, 1990. He broke into a Florida apartment in the middle of the night where 2 college kids slept. He found one, Christina Powell, asleep on the living room couch, and he watched her, but he did not strike. Instead, he moved upstairs and found Sonia Larson asleep in her bed. He then woke her, taped her mouth shut so that Christina downstairs wouldn't hear, and then stabbed her to death. He then moved back downstairs where he would SA Christina, then go on to kill her as well. He would then go on to pose their bodies for the police to find. And as if all of that isn't sick enough, he was even comfortable enough to go and take a shower in their apartment before he went and left. But the next night he struck again, this time entering the home of Krista Hoyt. What makes this part of the case even more creepy is the fact that Krista wasn't even home at the point when Daniel Rowling entered her home. So Rowling actually patiently waited in her apartment until the morning for her to arrive, and when she arrived, he would bound and assault her before stabbing her to death. He would go ahead and pose her body too, but this time he kind of took an extra gruesome step in his measures by cutting off her head. After this weekend of horror, citizens in Florida were left in a state of shock. The crimes reminded many of Ted Bundy, who had killed several Florida students all the way back in 1978. But Rowling sadly was not done. Just 2 days later, on Monday, he broke into another apartment. He first made his way to the bedroom of Manny Taboto, where he would go ahead and murder him, but this would be the first time in the spree that he'd go ahead and attack a man. But Manny's roommate, a woman by the name of Tracy Pauls, was actually in another room, and when she heard Taboto trying to fight back against Rowling, she went into the bedroom where she too was sadly attacked. She was briefly able to get away to her bedroom and actually lock the door, but Rowling broke through the door and unfortunately stabbed her to death. And just as with his other female victims, Rowling would actually pose Pauls too, but he did nothing with the body of Taboto, which showed that he must have intended for all of his victims to be female, and that he wasn't actually expecting Taboto at all. After this, Rowling stopped and went inactive for months. He could have stayed that way for the rest of his life or waited to strike at some point, but his past would lead to his downfall. It turned out that the 5 Florida college students were not actually his first victims. He'd actually killed the year before in 1989. Not even 6 months earlier, on November 4th, 1989, he murdered a family of 3 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He'd broken into the home and killed a grandfather named Tom Grissom, his adult daughter Julie, and her 8-year-old son Sean. Now, as with Taboto and Pauls, he left the male bodies untouched, but he actually posed Julie Grissom for whoever to find her, and investigators noticed several similarities between the 2 murder sprees and believed it to be the same person responsible for both. And while that helped, it didn't tell them who the person was. The only thing that they could go on was the killer's blood type at the Shreveport scene, which told them that he had type B blood. The clues stopped there, but then Rowling made the all too common mistake that many killers have made. He couldn't keep his mouth shut. While in Shreveport, a Christian couple, Cindy Jurajak and Steve Dobbin, actually befriended Rowling at their church. They even invited him over to their home several times, but quickly discovered that he had a troubled mind that they needed to get away from. And in an ABC interview back in 2021, Jurajak re-encountered her friendship with Rowling. He'd come over every night, she said, and then one night, Stephen came in, and Rowling said, he's got to go. Rowling had actually told Steve Dobbin that he had a problem, and when Dobbin asked what that meant, Rowling told him that he likes to stick knives in people. So the Shreveport murders had already happened at this point, but Jurajak dismissed the comments. When the news went out nationwide, however, investigators suspected both crimes to be that of the same man, and the Florida location actually made her remember something else that Rowling had said to her that she couldn't seem to forget. She claimed that he told her, "One day I'm going to leave this town and go to where all the girls are beautiful, and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day." And this actually made her so uncomfortable that after the news went out nationwide, she would actually call Crime Stoppers and tell them, "I think there's one guy that you guys need to investigate," and that was Danny Rowling. The investigators didn't really have to do much to find Rowling at this point because he was actually sitting in jail in Florida. He'd been caught robbing a grocery store months earlier. In fact, just a week and a half after the last murders had occurred, and everyone now knows why the killings at that point had stopped. It turned out that a bank had been robbed on the same day that a murder happened too. With this connection, investigators looked over evidence, including tape and tools from the robbery, and they actually discovered that they matched what had been used in the killings. Not only that, but Rowling had type B blood, and in another sloppy confessional move had actually spoken about the killings in a personal diary that investigators found. Rowling was arrested and put on trial. It was actually discovered that Rowling had suffered severe and constant abuse at the hands of his father, which may have helped explain a little bit where his madness came from. But I mean, there are a lot of people, to be fair, that go through abuse at the hands of their parents and don't go off to kill college students, or anyone for that matter. But the severe and constant abuse that Rowling received from his father would not save him. Daniel Rowling was found guilty of his crimes and sentenced to death, and on October 25th, 2006, he was executed. But in 1994, the trial of Daniel Rowling was underway, and ABC aired their show about it. And when they aired this show, Kevin Williamson was watching. While the screenplay that he wrote was not about the Gainesville Ripper, it was actually about the fear that he felt that night. And Williamson then passed that fear down to us all, and we've been living with it ever since.